Hello and welcome to Guidance Review. I'm David Pudwill, and today we're going to be talking about FDA's recent final guidance on multiple function device products, policy, and considerations. This is a document that was issued in July 2020, and the draft was issued back in April of 2018. There are three key takeaways that I want you to get out of today's video. The first is regarding considerations for multiple function device products. The second is regarding assessing the impact of other functions on the device function under review. And finally, to understand the content of a pre-market submission for device function under review. A couple other details as well that we'll pick up along the way. This is a fairly comprehensive, large guidance document. But without much further ado, we'll get into it. And we'll start by highlighting some of the differences between the draft guidance and this final guidance. So if we pull up the main page for the guidance here, we can scroll down and pull up that docket number, and we can go ahead and pull that docket up here, and we can see that there are 13 comments. We can also pull up the draft guidance here from 2018. We can see that it was posted in April of 2018. And if we pull that up here, it looks like a Word version, but this should be a PDF here. We'll see here, just in terms of the page count, it's a difference of 27 pages versus 18 for the original draft. And notably, in terms of the examples that were provided, there were 5 examples in the original draft, and in the new guidance document we have 2 additional examples here at the end of the guidance document. So that helps to explain a little bit of the discrepancy in length. So as we go ahead and get into the guidance document here, move down, we'll see that this particular guidance is applicable to the Center for Devices and Radiologic Health, the Center for Biologics, and the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, as well as the Office of Combination Products. And this is specifically related to digital health. So you can email digitalhealth@fda.hhs.gov, and alternatively, you can email ocod@fda.hhs.gov, CBER-regulated devices, and there's some additional contact details here. Also, the Office Combination Product email is listed here as well. And here we see reference to regulations.gov, where we've just come from. And additional copies can be requested from CDRH, CBER, and CDER. And here we get into the table of contents. We can see here it's a fairly voluminous guidance document that we're getting into today. And hopefully we'll be able to keep things relatively straightforward and quick, be able to move through this information relatively efficiently. So if we get down into the body, there's an introduction here about medical products containing several functions, in some cases, some of which are subject to FDA's regulatory oversight as medical devices, while others are not. And is specifically Section 3060, Part A of 21st Century Cures Act amended the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, FD&C Act, to add Section 520 Subpart O, which excludes certain software functions from the definition of device in Section 201H of the FD&C Act. The Cures Act also states that in the cases of a product with multiple functions that contains both a software non-device function and a device function, FDA may assess the impact that the software non-device function has on the device function when assessing the safety and effectiveness of the device function. FDA believes that a similar approach should be used for the assessment of all multiple function device products. Products with at least one device function and at least one other function, see Section 3 below, are referred to in this guidance as multiple function device products. For purposes of this guidance, for any given product, the term function is a distinct purpose of the product, which could be the intended use or a subset of the intended use of the product. The guidance explains FDA's regulatory approach and policy for all multiple function device products. Specifically, this guidance clarifies when and how FDA intends to assess the impact of other functions that are not subject to a pre-market review on the safety and effectiveness of a device function that is subject to FDA review. The purpose of the guidance is to identify the principles, pre-market review practices, and policies for FDA's regulatory assessment of such products, and to give examples, as we noted at the end of the guidance document. FDA links here to the recognized consensus standards database and appropriate use of voluntary consensus standards, and also standards development and use of standards and regulatory submissions reviewed by the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research. Here we get into some more of the background here on Section 201H. So this is an explanation of what defines a device. And specifically here, the term device has been modified to not include software functions pursuant to Section 520, Part O. Functions that fall within this definition are devices, and therefore subject to FDA's oversight. So this definition constitutes a device. So that would be an instrument, apparatus, implement, machine, contrivance, implant, in vitro reagent, or other similar or related article, including any component, part, accessory, which is recognized by the official national formulary or USP or any supplement to them, intended for use in the diagnosis of disease or other conditions, or in cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease in man or other animals, or intended to affect the structure or any function of the body of man or other animals, and which does not achieve its primary intended purpose through chemical action within or on the body of man or other animals, and which is not dependent upon being metabolized for the achievement of its primary intended purposes. And these would be drugs and biologics. Functions that fall within this definition are devices, as we noted, subject to FDA's oversight. And for example, FDA notes that some devices are subject to pre-market review. That would be PMA submissions, may require de novo classification, an investigational device exemption, a humanitarian device exemption. This IDE would be a clinical study. HDE would be a narrower subset of the population of, let's say, a PMA device. This would be limited to a smaller number of patients annually who could experience the condition, which would be a requirement for HDE amongst others, or a BLA. Other lower risk devices are exempt from pre-market review but are subject to general controls, including registration and listing, good manufacturing practices, and adverse event reporting. These are all sort of the standard device types for medical devices. You've got your 510Ks, your PMAs, your IDEs, your HDEs, or for biologics, your BLAs. So these would all be potentially devices or combination products. Other lower risk devices are exempt from pre-market review but are subject to general controls. And FDA has issued guidance that it does not intend to focus its regulatory oversight on some devices that pose a low risk to patients. FDA has done this for many low-risk software functions, and there's another guidance on policy for device software functions in mobile medical applications and general wellness policy for low-risk devices that are linked here. And here in December of 2016, the Cures Act was signed into law. And Section 3060 of this legislation, titled Clarifying Medical Software Regulation, amended the FD&C Act to add Section 520 Part O, which describes software functions that are excluded from the definition of the term device in Section 201H. In addition, this Section 520O subpart 2, reproduced below, describes the regulation and assessment of a software product with multiple functions. So this would be in the case of a product with multiple functions that contain A, at least one software function that meets the criteria under paragraph 1 or that otherwise does not meet the definition of device under Section 201H, and B, at least one function that does not meet the criteria under paragraph 1 and that otherwise meets the definition of a device under Section 201H. The Secretary shall not regulate the software function of such product described in subparagraph A as a device. Notwithstanding the preceding sentence, when assessing the safety and effectiveness of the device function or other functions of such product described in subparagraph B, the Secretary may assess the impact that the software function or functions described in subparagraph A have on such device function or functions. And that'll be important later as we get into. So the scope here, as mentioned above, in this guidance for any given product, the term function is a distinct purpose of the product, which could be intended use or a subset of the intended use of the product. For example, a product with an intended use to analyze data has one function, analysis. A product with an intended use to store, transfer, and analyze data has three functions: one, storage; two, transfer; and three, analysis. As this example illustrates, a product may contain multiple functions. The following terms are used for the purpose of this guidance. Device function is a function that meets the definition of a device. And other function, a function that does not meet the definition of device, meets the definition of device but is not subject to pre-market review. It's 510(k) exempt. Or it meets the definition of a device, but for which FDA has expressed its intention not to enforce compliance with applicable regulatory controls. Device function under review. This is a function for which FDA is conducting pre-market review. And a multiple function device product contains at least one device function and at least one other function. In the pre-market review context, a multiple function device product is a product with at least one device function under review and one other function. For example, during pre-market review of a multiple function device product, a device function that requires a PMA would be evaluated according to the principles of this guidance. In the post-market context, a multiple function device product is a product with at least one device function that is the focus of FDA's oversight and one other function. For example, during an inspection of a facility manufacturing a multiple function device product, the principles of this guidance would apply to a 510(k) exempt device function. In accordance with existing policies, FDA intends not to review a device function subject to an enforcement discretion policy merely because it is part of a multiple function device product. So here, although Section 520 Part 02 of the FDA Act applies to the regulation of products containing at least one device function and at least one non-device software function, FDA believes the same principles should apply to the assessment of all multiple function device products, whether those functions are software-based, hardware-based, or both. This document does not provide guidance on which functions do and do not meet the definition of a device. It also does not provide guidance on which functions meet the device definition, but are those for which FDA has expressed its intention not to enforce compliance with applicable requirements of the FDA Act. Sections 4 to 6 and 8 to 9 of this document discuss the policy in this guidance for multiple function device products, as well as modifications to other functions and post-market requirements. Generally, these policies apply to device functions under review within a multiple function device product, including multiple function device products included in a combination product. Similar principles may apply for drug or biologic-led combination products that include a multi-function device product. The guidance does not address the pre-market submission requirements nor submission requirements for modifications of a drug or biologic constituent part of a combination product. And FDA notes here that this does not change FDA's review of a drug or biologic constituent part of a combination product. And the principles outlined in this guidance reflect a safety-based approach to risk management, which is aligned with ISO 14971. So here, in terms of the policy for pre-market review of multiple function device products, consistent with the FDA Act as amended by the Cures Act, certain software functions in a multifunction device product are not a device because they do not meet the statutory device definition in Section 201H of the FDA Act. Such other functions are not the subject of FDA's review simply because they are part of a multi-function device product. However, FDA may assess the impact of other functions when assessing the safety and effectiveness of the device functions under review of a multi-function device product. So, for example, FDA does not regulate a general-purpose computing platform, but may assess its impact on the safety and effectiveness of a device function under review, such as a mobile medical application. This approach is similar to how FDA considers a product that includes an intragastric balloon subject to pre-market approval and an endoscope accessory that is 510(k) exempt. It would be like, let's say, an endoscope guide wire. In this case, FDA may assess the impact of the endoscope accessory on the safety and effectiveness of the intragastric balloon. For some device functions, FDA has expressed its intention not to enforce compliance with applicable requirements. In accordance with existing policies, FDA intends not to review of a device function subject to an enforcement discretion policy, merely because it is part of a multifunction device product. Instead, FDA intends to review the device functions for which clearance or approval is being sought. And for example, if a manufacturer seeks clearance or approval for a device function that is analysis and not the device function for which FDA has expressed its intention not to enforce compliance, that could be trending, then FDA intends only to review the analysis function and assess the trend function only insofar as it could negatively impact the analysis function. In that instance, because FDA is only reviewing the analysis function, FDA's decision to clear or approve applies only to the analysis function. And as described in Section 6A below, in their risk assessment process, manufacturers should determine if an other function impacts the safety or effectiveness of the device function under review. These impacts could be negative or they could be positive in some cases. So, as described here for multiple function device products, manufacturers should provide in their pre-market submission information that is related to the impacts of other functions only if they could negatively impact device function under review, or if they positively impact the device function under review, and this fact will be represented in the device function under review's labeling. So again, you have to demonstrate what you're going to label the device for. So unless you're going to label a positive impact, you don't have to identify that. And here, FDA has linked the CDRH pre-market review submission cover sheet. Although FDA does not recommend submitting information about all positive effects from other functions in a pre-market submission, all impact assessments, negative, positive, and no impact, must be performed and documented as part of design validation. And this is subject to FDA review during their inspection. So we're going to get into considerations for multiple function device products. FDA guidances with pre-market submission recommendations for medical devices apply to products with at least one device function under review. The following section describe additional considerations for multiple function device products. However, there is no one-size-fits-all approach for the wide variety of multiple function device products, and manufacturers should consider their products' specific functions and conditions of use. So here, FDA gets into separation and design and implementation of the device function. The device function under review should, to the extent possible, be separated from other functions in its design and implementation. This is more relevant maybe to software, but could refer to other functionality as well, where ideally you want to limit the implication that other functions could have on the device function of the product. And you want to prevent the other function from negatively impacting the device function under review. You want to document the results of a thorough risk analysis of the impacts of other functions and mitigation strategies employed. Architecture decisions early in the design cycle can facilitate optimal separation for risk control. And when separation is not achievable, the interconnection and interdependencies should be explained and included in the hazard analysis, and appropriate controls should be put in place. And when considering cybersecurity risks, some level of separation of the device function under review from other functions in design may be necessary to minimize cybersecurity risks. And here, FDA refers to the later sections regarding how to assess the impact of other functions on the device function under review and what content should be included. The impact of other functions. The manufacturer of a multiple function device product should consider the following regarding all other functions of the product: the role of the other function, any limitations of the device function under review, developing appropriate hardware and software resource specifications, how to ensure appropriate actions are taken by the end user when using the device function under review with the other function, identification, evaluation, and mitigation of any additional risks, including cybersecurity risks. And here in Section 6, on assessing the impact of other functions on the device function under review, FDA is looking for pre-market assessment of a product with multiple functions. Basically follow this two-step process. Part A, is there an impact on the safety or effectiveness of the device function under review as a result of the other function? And B, could the impact result in increased risk or have an adverse effect on performance, of the device function under review. That would be a negative impact. The flowchart below is intended as a guide to be used when doing this assessment, and each decision point in the flowchart and its relevant considerations are described in the sections below. So here we see this neat little flowchart. So you start here and you answer the question, is there an impact on the safety or effectiveness of the device function under review as a result of the other function? If yes, then you answer the question, could the impact result in increased risk or have an adverse effect on performance? If yes, then include appropriate documentation in the pre-market submission, and in addition, document the impact assessment and justification for determination of impact of the other functions on the device function under review in accordance with your quality system. If you end up answering no to the first question, then you end up at documenting the impact assessment and justification for determination of impact of the other functions on the device function under review in accordance with your quality system. And if you answer yes to this first question and no to the second question, then you have to answer the question, could the impact result in a positive impact that the sponsor intends to include in the labeling? If yes, then we end up back over here. If no, then we end up down here. And then if we go ahead and continue, is there an impact on the safety or effectiveness of the device function under review as a result of the other function? FDA says here that manufacturers should determine if an other function impacts the safety or effectiveness of the device function under review. If so, FDA recommends that manufacturers evaluate that impact and include the relevant parts of the other function in their hazard analysis. And it's important to consider the various relationships between functions that may exist, and the existence of a relationship does not necessarily mean that there may be an impact on the safety or effectiveness of the device function under review. And an example here about including a mobile medical application that has a relationship with a computing platform on which it is executed. The computing platform may or may not have an impact on the safety or effectiveness of the software device function. And there are some examples below. When assessing if an other function impacts the device function under review within the same product, considerations should include whether there are shared computational resources, data dependencies, or any other type of relationship between functions. And keep in mind, this is the same general approach that FDA would apply for non-software functions as well. The following are example of questions that may help to determine if an other function may impact the safety or effectiveness of the device under review. And it's not intended to be a comprehensive list. And here's a list of questions that FDA provides. And then there's this section on, could the impact result in increased risk or have an adverse effect on performance? That is a negative impact. If the other function impacts the device function under review, the extent of the impact should be evaluated and included in the hazard analysis. And the manufacturer, that's you, presumably, should determine whether the impacts could be positive or negative. For positive impacts, you should identify the beneficial impact that the other function has on the device function under review when operating as intended, and confirm that there is no adverse impact on the device function under review if the other function were to fail to operate as intended. For negative impacts, the manufacturer should identify whether there could be increased risk and/or an adverse effect on performance due to the combination of the other function with the device function under review. And in terms of impacts on safety, the impacts on safety are often impacts associated with risk. A risk-based assessment should be used to identify and analyze all risks of a device function under review, including those that may result from the inclusion of other functions in the product. The following examples can be used as a guide. Here, FDA identifies the other function, introduces a new hazardous situation or new cause of an existing hazardous situation that's not otherwise present, and that would be an increased risk. The other function increases the severity of harm associated with a hazardous situation, again, an increased risk. And the other function is a risk control measure for a device function under review, again, an increased risk. The use or implementation of the other function impacts a risk control measure for a device function under review. When assessing the cybersecurity risk of other functions on the device function under review, it should be assumed that the other functions may be employed maliciously or unintentionally to cause an adverse impact on the device function under review. So you need to be somewhat worst case in your assessment here. For example, the unavailability of the device function under review could present risks that should be considered and appropriately mitigated because a cybersecurity threat to the other functions may lead to the device function under review becoming unavailable to the intended user. And here we look at impacts to effectiveness. The impacts to effectiveness are typically impacts to the performance of the device. For example, impacts to the responsiveness, usability, or efficiency of the device. If there could be adverse impacts to the device function under review as a result of the other functions, then appropriate verification and validation should be performed with the product to characterize the performance of the device function under review and evaluate if there may be an adverse effect on the performance. The following examples can be used as a guide to determine whether there could be an adverse impact on performance. The performance or clinical functionality of the device function under review depends on the other function for the device function under review to perform as specified, and the performance of the device function under review fails to meet the specified performance level due to the other function. Note that the relationship between a device function under review and the other functions may be limited to sharing resources on a general purpose computing platform. So if the only identified relationship between the device function under review and the other function is sharing of a common computing platform, the risk assessment for the device function under review should include the hazards associated with running on a common general purpose computing platform. And here we get into the content of a pre-market submission for device function under review. And FDA specifically lays out for a multiple function device product that the recommendation that the validation and risk analysis include an impact assessment and rationale for a manufacturer's determination of the impact of other functions, whether no impact, negative or positive, on the device function under review in accordance with the manufacturer's quality system. And the impact assessment should include whether or not there's an impact on the safety and effectiveness of the device function under review as a result of the other function, and if there is, whether the impact could result in increased risk or either an adverse or positive effect on performance. FDA may request to see design validation documents, including the documentation of the impact assessment. And if the other function does not impact the device function under review, then the pre-market submission for the device function under review does not need to include the documentation described in the section for the other function, consistent with FDA's guidance, the least burdensome provisions, concepts, and principles. If the other function could adversely impact device function under review, then the pre-market submission for the device function under review should include the appropriate documentation identified below for the other function. And if the device function under review could be positively impacted by the other function, the impact of the other function has a beneficial impact on the device function under review when operating as intended and does not have an adverse impact on the device function under review if the other function fails to operate as intended. Then if you would like the positive impact to be considered in FDA's assessment, then you should include the appropriate documentation on this other function. In terms of indications for use, the indications for use should include only the indications for use of the device function under review. The indications for use should not include the indications for use of any other function unless a sponsor would like the positive impact to be considered in FDA's assessment of the device function under review. And here for device description, FDA wants you to describe the device accordingly, explain each of the functions, may describe the other functions that either do not have or could have a positive impact, and then labeling. Labeling may not be false or misleading. Labeling should include a description of the other functions adequate to ensure appropriate use of the device, and the device labeling must comply with applicable statutes and regulations. In terms of design, FDA wants you to provide details consistent with the guidance for the content of pre-market submissions for software contained in medical devices, which is linked here. Device hazard analysis, the same would be true for software contained in medical devices, and FDA wants to see a risk-based assessment consistent with ISO 14971. Requirements and specifications, again, here's the link to the guidance document for software. And in terms of performance testing, this is going to be dependent on the specific device. And if you need to perform safety, performance, or other testing, you should follow the relevant existing regulations, policies, guidances, or FDA-recognized consensus standards for your device function under review. And then here in terms of submission summary, an approved or cleared device may include functionality that FDA has not assessed. FDA intends to make the extent of the product's assessment clear such as with a statement in the 510K summary, PMA summary of safety and effectiveness data, de novo decision or HD summary of safety and probable benefit. For example, if a product includes a device function under review and an other function that is not subject to pre-market review, the statement might read as follows: that the medical device product has functions subject to FDA pre-market review, as well as functions that are not subject to FDA pre-market review. For this application, if the product has functions that are not subject to FDA pre-market review, FDA assess those functions only to the extent that they either could adversely impact the safety and effectiveness of the functions subject to FDA pre-market review, or they are included as a labeled positive impact that was considered in the assessment of the functions subject to FDA pre-market review. And here, modifications to the other functions of a multiple function device product. If there's a modification, then in accordance with the policy set out above, the modification should be assessed to determine if the change could significantly impact the safety or effectiveness of the device function that was the subject of FDA review. If you find such an impact, and it could adversely impact the device function or positively impact the device function, and the impact is included in the device function's labeling, labeled positive impact, then you need to reference deciding when to submit a 510K, deciding when to submit a 510K for a software change, or modifications to devices subject to PMA, pre-market approval, to determine if a new pre-market submission is necessary for the modifications to the other function. And here, the sponsor should document the impact assessment. The impact assessment should include whether or not there's an impact to the safety or effectiveness. If the modification to the other function is part of a combination product that was submitted under drug or biologic product application type, the information related to the change should be submitted using the appropriate drug or biologic submission if required. And here, application of other devices and post-market requirements. General control requirements apply to device functions subject to 510K, PMA, de novo, or HDE requirements, and to device functions that are 510K exempt. For example, device functions in multiple function device products must comply with design control requirements under the Quality System Regulation 21 CFR Part 820. As another example, in accordance with 21 CFR 80350, FDA expects the manufacturer of a device function to investigate the cause of an adverse event and to submit an adverse event report when the manufacturer becomes aware of information that reasonably suggests that the device function may have caused or contributed to a death or serious injury, among other circumstances. And if the manufacturer of a multiple function device product determines that an other function affected the safety or effectiveness of the device function, leading to a reportable death, serious injury, or a malfunction, or it is not certain about whether the device function or other function in a product caused or contributed to a reportable event, the manufacturer would still be required to report it if the information reasonably suggests the device may have caused the death or serious injury. FDA continues to intend not to enforce general control requirements for device functions for which FDA has expressed its intention not to enforce applicable regulatory controls at this time. And combination products that include multiple function device products generally have additional requirements, such as those requirements applicable to drug or biologic constituent parts. And there's more information here. And then we get into the examples. And these are excellent reading. But I will leave these to you to go through on your own. There are an extra couple examples, a couple bonus examples that we didn't get in the draft guidance here at the end. So definitely check out these two examples as well. Energy delivering device with optional app, MDDS, and pulsed ultrasound and biopsy needle guide kit. I just want to thank you for bearing with me through to the end here. And just want to make sure that you take some key messages away from today's video. First, that you understand the considerations for multiple function device products. That second, you understand assessing the impact of other functions on the device function under review. And also that you understand the content of a pre-market submission for device function under review. And we've gone through all of that. So hopefully you found that helpful, informative. I know it's been a long video, so thank you for bearing with me through to the end. And please like and subscribe. Give me feedback and suggestions in terms of what videos you'd like to see, any content that you haven't seen so far that you would like reviewed. And very much look forward to any feedback or comments that you have. And I hope that you have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you very much. I'll see you in the next one.